A mother in the Visayas region of the Philippines woke up to find her newborn had been replaced. Not kidnapped. Replaced. In the crib where her child had been sleeping, there was a bundle of sticks and grass, wrapped in cloth, still warm, still moving. Whatever was in that crib was alive, but it was not her baby. She didn't call the police. She called the village elder, because in the Philippines, everyone already knew what had happened, and everyone already knew what took it. The Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. For centuries, these islands developed their own legends, their own warnings, their own monsters, independently, in isolation, shaped by the particular darkness of the tropics, the density of the jungle, and the very human terror of things that look almost right but aren't quite. These are not stories told to children at bedtime to make them behave. They are warnings passed between adults. They appear in news reports. They are discussed in government buildings and church confessionals. They are believed, not as metaphor, not as tradition, but as fact by millions of people alive today. Tonight, we are going into 5 of them. And I need you to understand something before we start. Nobody who believes in these legends thinks they are legends. There is a bite mark you do not want to find on your child's skin in the morning. It looks almost human. Almost. The teeth marks are slightly too wide, the spacing slightly too close. If you know what you are looking for, you recognize it immediately. Filipino mothers know what they are looking for. The legend. The aswang is perhaps the most feared creature in Philippine folklore, and unlike most monsters, she does not live in the forests or the mountains. She lives next door. By day, the aswang appears completely human. A woman. Usually quiet, usually kind, usually someone the community trusts. She might be the midwife who delivered your children. She might be the woman who sells vegetables at the market every morning. She smiles. She helps. She seems perfectly normal. At night, something changes. Her tongue extends. Not inches. Feet. 6 feet of searching, probing tongue that slides under doors, through thatch roofs, through any gap it can find. She is looking for pregnant women. She is looking for the unborn. When she finds what she is looking for, she reaches through the roof and extracts the fetus with her tongue. She leaves behind a substitute, a bundle of sticks, a piece of wood, whatever she can find, and she shapes it to feel warm, to feel alive, just long enough for the mother to go back to sleep. In the morning, the mother discovers what is in the crib is not her baby. It never was. The regional reality. This is not a uniform legend. The aswang varies dramatically depending on which island you are on, which province, which village. In some regions, she is a shapeshifter who takes the form of a large black dog. In others, she can become a bird, flying low over rooftops at night. In Capiz province, on the island of Panay, she is so deeply believed that the region has been called the capital of the aswang. And people from Capiz have historically faced discrimination in other parts of the Philippines because of the association. In 2012, a local government official in Capiz organized an anti-Aswang task force. Not as a publicity stunt, not as a joke, as a genuine response to community reports. Think about that. An official government body in the 21st century created specifically to address aswang activity. The detail nobody talks about. Here's what the short version of this legend never tells you. The Aswang does not always take the baby. Sometimes she takes something else. She drains vitality, slowly, over weeks. Her victim begins to waste away without explanation. They lose weight, they become pale, they sleep too much and wake up exhausted. Doctors find nothing wrong. The community finds plenty wrong. There are documented cases across Philippine medical literature where patients presenting with unexplained wasting illness were treated both by physicians and by albularyo, traditional healer, simultaneously. The medical community treated the symptoms. The albularyo treated the cause. In some cases, both claimed the patient recovered. Who do you believe? Fuyuyayo flapping wings at night in the Philippines. Large, heavy, slow flapping. You do not go outside to look. You stay inside. You pour salt along every windowsill and every door frame. You place garlic at every opening in your walls. And you pray you are not pregnant. The legend. The Manananggal is the most visually disturbing creature in Philippine folklore, and that is a significant achievement in a tradition that includes no shortage of disturbing creatures. She begins as a woman. At night, she applies a dark, viscous oil to her skin, and her body separates at the torso. Her upper half, head, arms, and organs, grows enormous black wings and takes flight. Her lower half remains standing on the ground, waiting for her return before sunrise. Her intestines and stomach hang below her as she flies. They dangle in the air, trailing beneath her wings, glistening. She makes no effort to conceal them. She does not need to. By the time you can see what is hanging below her, she has already found you. Like the Aswang, she hunts pregnant women. She hovers above houses, her long tongue searching downward through rooftops, seeking the fetus. She feeds the vulnerability. But here's what makes the Manananggal different from nearly every other creature in this tradition. She has a very specific weakness, and the community knows exactly how to use it. Her lower half. If you can find where she left her legs, and in village communities, people searched, and if you can pour salt or crushed garlic or ash on the severed torso before she returns at dawn, she cannot reconnect. She is trapped. Her upper half will burn in the first sunlight, and she will die. This is not abstract folklore. This is tactical information. Communities knew this. They organized. In regions with high Manananggal belief, there are accounts of villages posting night watches specifically to find the lower halves of suspected Manananggal before dawn. The psychological layer. Spend enough time with this legend and a pattern becomes visible. The Aswang, the Manananggal. Both target pregnant women. Both steal the unborn. Both appear as women themselves. The Philippines historically had extremely high maternal and infant mortality. Childbirth was genuinely dangerous. Losing a baby or a mother in delivery was common, expected, and devastating. These legends gave communities a framework for the unbearable. The baby was not lost. It was taken. There was a cause. There was a perpetrator. And if there was a perpetrator, there was the possibility of prevention, of protection, of fighting back. Whether that is comforting or more disturbing is something only you can decide. You man walking a path that you have walked 100 times. You know every turn. You know every landmark. And yet somehow you have walked for an hour and you are back where you started. You try again. You end up back at the same place. You are not lost. You are caught. The legend. The Tikbalang stands as tall as a man, but its head and hooves belong to a horse. It lives in the mountains and the forests, particularly in the old-growth trees. It is territorial. It does not attack unless provoked, but its definition of provoked is difficult to predict. Its primary power is disorientation. The Tikbalang can make you walk in circles. It manipulates perception so that paths loop back on themselves, that familiar landmarks appear in the wrong positions, that the forest rearranges itself around you. Travelers have reported walking for hours, certain they were moving forward, only to emerge back at their starting point. Some accounts describe hearing it laugh, a low sound, somewhere between a whinny and a human chuckle, coming from somewhere above and behind you. How to break free. There are two traditional methods of escaping a tikbalang's disorientation. The first is to turn your shirt inside out. Something about reversing the garment breaks the confusion. The logic being that if the world is inverted, inverting yourself corrects the imbalance. The second is to ask permission aloud. Say, "Tabi-tabi po. Excuse me, I mean no offense." Some accounts say this alone is enough to make the path clear again. The Tikbalang, according to the people who believe in it most deeply, is not evil. It is territorial and capricious, like a landlord who never told you the rules of the lease. Respect its space, acknowledge its presence, and it will let you pass. The documented cases. Disorientation in specific geographic locations is not unique to the Philippines. There are documented cases across the archipelago. Particular mountain trails, specific forest paths, where multiple independent travelers across decades have reported becoming confused in exactly the same spots, often described as feeling like the landscape was moving around them. Geographers attribute this to terrain features that create visual illusions, slopes that appear level, paths that curve in ways the eye cannot easily follow. The brain fills in the gaps incorrectly, and the traveler walks in circles. The Tikbalang believers have a simpler explanation. It is still there. It is still watching, and whether you believe in it or not, it knows you are on its land. This one naging different from everything else in this video. This one has photographs. The location. Balete Drive is a real street in Quezon City, Manila. It is lined with old balete trees, large, dark canopied trees with tangled roots that Filipino folklore has always associated with spirits. The street is narrow. The trees create a natural tunnel overhead, and at night, the canopy blocks enough light that the street feels genuinely isolated, even in the middle of a major city. Taxi drivers in Manila know this street. Many refuse to drive it alone at night. Some will not drive it at all, regardless of the time. This is not a rumor about taxi drivers. If you visit Manila and ask taxi drivers about Balete Drive, they will tell you directly, without embarrassment. They do not go there after dark. The legend. The white lady appears in the back seat of vehicles traveling alone at night on Balete Drive. She is a young woman in a white dress, sometimes with long black hair covering her face. Drivers notice her in the rearview mirror. When they look back, directly, not in the mirror, she is gone. Or she was never there. Or she is still there and her face is wrong in a way the driver cannot explain and will not describe in detail. Some accounts describe her as a victim of a hit-and-run accident on that road decades ago. Some say she was attacked there. The origin stories vary. What does not vary is the location and the consistency of the description across completely independent witnesses spanning more than 50 years. The evidence. In 2006, a Philippine television program conducted an investigation on Balete Drive using night vision cameras in an unoccupied vehicle parked on the street. When they reviewed the footage, there was a figure visible in the frame that had not been visible to the crew present during filming. The footage aired. It was analyzed. It was not conclusively debunked yet. There are photographs circulating from Balete Drive that show pale shapes in windows and doorways of the buildings along the road. Most can be explained. Some cannot be explained to the satisfaction of everyone who has looked at them. The street still exists. The taxis still avoid it. And if you visit Manila late enough, you can walk it yourself. Whether you should is a different question entirely. You have almost certainly smelled the Kapre without knowing it. If you have ever passed a large old tree at night and caught an unexpected smell of tobacco smoke with no one around, no building, no person, no logical source, you have been in the presence of one. It noticed you. It decided you were not worth the effort. That is the good outcome. The legend. The Kapre is enormous. Accounts describe it as between 7 and 9 feet tall, dark-skinned, covered in coarse hair, with glowing red eyes. It lives in the upper branches of large trees, particularly the Balete, acacia, and mango trees that grow large enough to support its size. It smokes a massive tobacco pipe constantly, and the smoke drifts down through the leaves. Unlike every other creature in this video, the Kapre is not primarily malicious. It is territorial, it is capricious, it is capable of cruelty, but it does not hunt, it watches. When it becomes interested in a human, which seems to happen unpredictably, based on criteria only the Kapre understands, it does not attack, it follows. It will follow a person home. It will follow them across provinces. It will sit in the trees outside their house and watch their window, and the person will feel every night that something very large is observing them from the darkness outside. And they will not be wrong. The interesting part. Here's what makes the Kapre genuinely unusual in the context of Philippine folklore. You can negotiate with it. If you acknowledge the Kapre's tree, if you say, tabi-tabi po before cutting branches, before building near its home, before doing anything that might disturb it, the Kapre will generally leave you alone. This is not appeasement of an evil force. This is courtesy extended to a neighbor. Filipino environmentalists have noted something striking about the distribution of Kapre legends. The trees most associated with Kapre habitation, the oldest, largest trees in any given area, are almost never cut down. Even in communities where deforestation has been significant, the Kapre trees survive. Not because of conservation policy, because nobody wants to disturb what lives in them. The Kapre legend, whatever its origin, has functioned for centuries as one of the most effective conservation tools in Philippine history. The oldest trees on the islands are old, partly because a giant with glowing red eyes lives in them and everyone knows it. 7,000 islands. These 5 legends come from a handful of regions, a fraction of the archipelago. Every island has its own traditions, its own warnings, its own things that move in the dark. Most of them have never been documented in English. Most of them exist only in the oral tradition of communities that have never been interviewed by a camera crew or studied by a folklorist. The Philippines is one of the most biodiverse environments on Earth. Its jungles contain species that scientists are still discovering. Its deep waters have not been fully mapped. Its oldest communities have memories that go back further than written record. Nobody knows what lives on those other islands. The people who live there think they do. If you want to go deeper into any of these legends, into any country's folklore, subscribe. We cover every country, every culture, every fear, and leave a comment telling me which country should be next. I read them all.